Hi, and welcome to the Lewiston Tribune podcast. This is episode number 44. I'm Matt Baney, managing editor of the Lewiston Tribune, and I'm joined today by Marty Trillhaase, the Tribune's opinion page editor. Marty, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Very good. We're here to talk about the Bryan Kohberger case, specifically the plea deal that was arrived at a couple weeks ago, and a lot of reaction to that. He's going to be officially sentenced next week, but we know pretty much beyond doubt, I think, that he's going to be sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms for the Moscow murders. Before the plea deal was reached, the possibility of the death penalty was on the table, but this deal takes that off the table. So I guess, Marty, what is your reaction to the plea deal? And before you answer, I should also mention, as our opinion page editor, Marty is has more of a license to use his opinions as we discussed today. Our reporters are supposed to keep their opinions to themselves, but not Marty. So what's your opinion of the plea deal, Marty?
Well, I always thought it was likely, though not inevitable. This was a case that, so many times in a murder case, you have these extenuating, aggravating circumstances under the law that are vague. So they're subject to interpretation. One that I always think here is the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, manifesting exceptional depravity. By the murder circumstances surrounding its commission, the defendant exhibited utter disregard for human life. Doesn't that define every murder?
True.
Okay, but in this case, you had some objective aggravating factors. At the time the murder was committed, the defendant also committed another murder. Check.
Yep.
The defendant knowingly created a great risk of death to many other persons. Check. The murder was committed in perpetration of or attempt to perpetrate. List of felonies. This was a burglary.
Mm-hmm.
The defendant, by his conduct, whether such conduct was before, during, or after the commission of the murder at hand, has exhibited a propensity to commit murder which will probably constitute a continuing threat to society. Check. I think the man likes it.
Right.
On the other hand, ever since the Supreme Court ruled that it's a jury, not the judge, that imposes the death penalty, this has become incredibly uncertain what'll come. The one that caught my eye, do you remember the case in Aurora, Colorado? James Egan Holmes walks into a theater and murders 12 people and wounds 70 more. And a jury, with that decision, one could not bring himself to impose a death penalty because the man was mentally ill. 2 more said they just couldn't do it. So I think Bill Thompson looked at this case as he did with the John Lee case and said, the uncertainty of what a jury will do in this case is a roll of the dice. It's not like going to a sentencing judge anymore. And I don't care what anybody says. You put them on a jury and they say, I can impose a death penalty. And then they sit in that courtroom for 2 or 3 months with a guy like Bryan Kohberger, and then it's up to them. And I can't imagine there isn't at least one of them that's thinking, I'll sleep better at night if I don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is, Bill Thompson cited that in the John Lee case when he didn't seek the death penalty. I suspect that when he's free to express himself more fully on it, that case will be at the top of his list. The uncertainty of a jury imposing a death sentence. You've already spent $3.5 million. You go to a trial. Who knows what happens? You get certainty here. The man is going to be in prison for the rest of his life, which would have been the case with the death penalty or without it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I wouldn't say I'm not surprised, but it seems to me it's the defense gets certainty. They don't risk the death penalty. Bill doesn't spend an enormous amount of money and time going after something that may prove elusive.
Right. Well, so that's this case in particular. In general, with the death penalty, what's your stance on it?
Well, I come to it from a couple 3 personal experiences. When I was still a reporter, I covered the Donald Paradis case. This was a man who was convicted of murder He was represented by an attorney who had never handled a felony, let alone a death penalty case. His co-defendant, with adequate counsel, was acquitted on the same set of facts. A massive campaign on his behalf was waged by national and state attorneys, and you could never get the Attorney General's office to look at new evidence. Eventually, they got a hearing before the Board of Pardons and Parole. It was still 3-2 Democratic appointees. Those 3 Democrats recommended clemency. And the Republican governor at the time granted it because he thought there's something wrong with this case. Within 2 or 3 years later, we found out what was wrong with this case. The victim had not died in Idaho. She had died in Washington. Idaho had no jurisdiction. And it turned out the original medical note said that, and the prosecution withheld it.
Oh.
So Paradis not only was released, but he picked up a nice piece of change for prosecutorial misconduct. Second case I wasn't too involved with, but I knew the attorney. He represented a guy named Charles Irwin Fain. He was convicted in the 80s of killing a girl. He was nowhere near the scene, but FBI analysis of hair samples got him convicted. DNA exonerated him. And in the third case was a fellow in Idaho Falls named Christopher Tapp, who was coerced into a guilty plea of a murder he did not commit with the threat of the death penalty. DNA evidence not only exonerated him, but found the guilty party, who was living across the street from at the time the girl was murdered. So I find the system incredibly flawed. I think it's disproportionate. I don't understand why somebody's on death row for killing one person when you have mass murders like Holmes and a couple others. Green River Killer, who killed, how many did he kill? 49 women in 16 years. The Unabomber, Gerald Lee Loeffler, who attempted to kill Gabby Giffords and killed 6 other people. How can those people live out their days in prison? And you say the system is fair when somebody's on death row for killing one person.
Right, right.
And I think it's flawed. You have mistakes are made, people are exonerated, and you have people who should get the death penalty, and if the system's fair, who don't, and then you have people who get it who maybe shouldn't. And then you end up with a system like Idaho, where the people who are going to get executed have been sitting on death row for 40 years. I mean, what are you going to do? Strap poor Gerald Brazuta to a chair and then shoot him? What's fair about that?
Right, right. Well, and another point, I don't know if this is in favor of the death penalty or against it. The Gonsalves family pointed out they were not happy. The family of Kaylee Gonsalves, one of the victims of the Kohberger murders, they were not happy with this plea deal, and they said in their statement that they felt that the prosecutor used the death penalty as a bargaining chip. And indeed, it probably is that. It probably does serve as that, and it certainly seemed to be the case here.
It's an enormous bargaining chip for any prosecutor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who can afford a death penalty case anymore?
Right.
I mean, what did they spend on this? $3.5 million? And how much of that was coming out of Latah County?
Mm-hmm.
But Bill got a guilty plea without a trial. And as Randy Staples noted last week,
one of our columnists.
Yes, we are moving away from criminal trials in this country, more and more toward plea bargains. And that gives enormous power to the prosecutor. And in the case of a capital crime, incredible power. I mean, again, the Christopher Tapp case, 20 years. Why would he plead guilty to something he didn't do? Because they threatened him with the death penalty.
Mm-hmm. And that adds another layer to the debate. I guess is there an indication of Bill Thompson's thoughts on the death penalty in general?
Other than his memo on the John Lee case, I don't know. I think that would be, to me, it'd be fascinating to find out how much of this business of the jury having to impose a sentence weighs on him, because I do think, didn't he have one reversed? Didn't he have was it the Shackelford case?
Right, that sounds familiar.
He had one where he had a ruling from the judge, then it was sent back to a jury, and I don't think there was a death sentence handed down in the second round. So I think he's probably looking at that. It does add a realm of uncertainty. Why go through all this? Imagine, just for the sake of argument, that you go through a 2-month trial, 3-month trial. You've spent all this time, all this money, all these headlines. You get to the jury, and one person says, "I can't sleep at night."
And the time and cost and
Yes.
everything, and you got to exactly where we're at right now.
Yeah, I'd love to ask him that question.
We perhaps will be able to ask that question soon. Just a couple hours before we're recording here, the judge, Stephen Hippler, lifted the non-dissemination order, the gag order in the case, meaning that officers of the court now, for the first time in a couple years, are free to comment outside of the courtroom about the case. That being said, Bill Thompson said the prosecution wasn't going to throw up any barriers to the non-dissemination order being lifted, but also mentioned he would not be speaking until after the sentencing is reached. The judge also ruled today that doesn't mean that all the documents in the case will become automatically unsealed. They'll remain sealed. He mentioned that they'll be unsealed in kind of a piecemeal fashion. It'll take, he said, not days, not weeks, maybe months before things are unsealed. He even warned, he said, now, reporters don't start sending in records request paperwork now because it's going to be denied. Eventually, these documents will become unsealed, but it's going to be a while. With the gag order now lifted, what do you anticipate, looking in your crystal ball, what do you anticipate the effect being?
Well, it depends how much interest is maintained in this case. You know, if there is still an incentive to pursue it, I would expect we'll find out just how well the investigation was going through the arrest. I mean, it certainly seemed like there were questions raised. Why would the mayor say this was a crime of passion? Why would the police chief first say there's no threat to the general public when there's no arrest, and then there is a threat? And it just seemed like how long was Kohberger on their suspect list? And if he was identified earlier, why was he allowed to remain at large? Those are questions I'd like to answer. I don't think we're going to get to the Holy Grail, which is why somebody with no known criminal history evolves into somebody who can murder 4 kids in their home with a knife. To me, that's the Holy Grail. How did that happen? What was in this guy's background, and why was he motivated to do this?
Yes, and that's what everybody, I think that, as you said, the Holy Grail. During sentencing next week on Wednesday, not only will the victims' families have a chance to speak in the courtroom, but there will be an opportunity for Kohberger to speak, but he's not compelled to speak.
I think, I'm no lawyer, I think all he has to do is give a statement of allocution where he says, "I did it." This, which he may have already satisfied 2 weeks ago.
And certainly during the plea deal hearing, he didn't have much to say, didn't show any emotion.
Well, that was, it was crazy. He showed about as much emotion as if he was pleading guilty to a parking ticket.
Yeah, it was a scene. Well, okay, so Marty, there won't be a trial. And what do you see as the pros and cons of trial being avoided here?
Pros, you get certainty. I mean, no matter what, death penalty, no death penalty, you were going to have this man die behind prison walls. Savings. I mean, if the statesman's correct, they've spent $3.6 million so far, and that's pre-trial. And just less trauma for the victims. I mean, it's not just the trial, and it's not just the testimony, but it's, on average, 20 years of appeals, the ups and downs of various rulings in the state and in the federal courts. And even if you were to get the death penalty, no certainty about the appeals process. And then the polling suggests the death penalty is no longer in favor with younger people. I think that's because of the efforts of the Innocence Project and others. That, I think they've got 100 people in this country who've been exonerated and freed from death row. Who's to say in 20 years from now, which is the average length from conviction to execution, that the country politically abolishes the death penalty, as it is doing in a piecemeal fashion in states such as Washington? So, even if you went through all that expense and you got the death sentence, what are the odds it's actually applied? But there are things we will never know, right? There's no substitute for a trial, for testimony, for cross-examination. And as Randy, again, is quoting Randy, this is something that's disappearing in this country. We're not seeing criminal trials like we used to. Perry Mason, it's not happening. It's all being done basically in backroom negotiations that are then submitted fait accompli to the presiding judge.
And it does. Speaking about that in general, trials going away, what do you think about that? I think I agree that there is something that's in our system. It seems like there should be more trials. It seems like, potentially a person who is innocent, as you mentioned, would, and maybe not even the death penalty being on the table, but maybe a lighter sentence. You could see a case where someone would say, well, I don't want to risk this. I'm going to take this lighter sentence.
I can see both sides, but that's the system you're facing. It's I remember when I started out in 1980, I did a story that says, it's shocking. 1/3 of all of the felony cases are reduced down to misdemeanors and pled out. I'll bet that percentage is flipped today.
It is surprising how few trials there are now.
Yeah.
Just almost just about every. I mean, we don't have the numbers in front of us, but
I got to assume it's what percentage of the criminal defendants are represented by a public defender or indigent? They can't afford it. Well, those guys are overworked, and it's just in their interest to get a deal.
Sure.
They're negotiators more than trial attorneys.
Yeah. I you mentioned that from your 1980 story that 1/3. If it's
I bet it's 2/3.
Yeah. I wouldn't doubt that at all. Maybe even more. So, okay. Well, back to the death penalty for a second. It's pretty clear that you are opposed to the death penalty, but can you think of any exceptions to that?
Yes.
There is one.
There is one.
What would that be?
Sirhan Sirhan, the man who killed Senator Bobby Kennedy after he clinched the California primary in 1968 and was on his way to being nominated for president. Had Bobby Kennedy lived and been elected, I do believe the Vietnam War would have ended 4 years earlier. So Sirhan Sirhan has the blood of 25,000 service people on his hands. I wouldn't mind seeing him executed.
Okay. And spoken like somebody that lived through that era. It's I'm sure part of that is your history of probably knowing people and growing up with people who went to Vietnam and
we got as many people killed after 68 as we did going into the war.
Okay. And you and I talked about this before, and I said, well, okay, how about if Lee Harvey Oswald had survived? Would he have been one you wouldn't mind seeing the death penalty imposed upon?
Well, let's not push it. I wouldn't mind it, but we don't know that he did it.
Well, that's true.
He wasn't convicted of anything, so
there's a there's a trial that would have been good. Yeah. Maybe we would have more clarity in that. Certainly, there would be more evidence if a trial had happened in that case.
I just remembered that it seemed like we were on the cusp of ending that war, and the next morning, it was all over.
Yeah. All right. Well, Marty, thanks for joining us on this week's episode of the podcast, and thank you for listening as well. Reminder, we have a new topic every week, and you can hear it at YouTube at lmtribune.com and on all the podcast apps. Be sure to subscribe and like and hit the notifications. And we'll see you next week. And we'll have a new topic then. Until then, have a great day. Thank you.